kind of jump in here. This is Chris Tebert. So thank you, Mayor Caniff. I just want to give a brief introduction here. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce you to our consultant, BT Engineering Inc., who assisted with the municipality's transportation master plan update, which is being presented tonight for council's approval. This transportation master plan update was triggered by the need to complete the planning and environmental assessment consultation and decision-making process within the 10-year horizon of the first transportation master plan for the municipality back in 2008. So this master plan will be to function as a supplementary document to the 2008 transportation master plan, which is basically an update to it and not an actual replacement to it. So with me tonight, I have from BT Engineering is Steve Taylor. He is the president of the company and project lead for this transportation master plan update. Steve has over 28 years of experience managing complex municipal class EA projects at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. So Steve will be sharing a brief presentation with the council tonight regarding the process and the steps taken to get us to this point. So, and with that, I will hand this presentation over to Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so tonight what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you an overview of the process that we use to evolve to update the transportation master plan. And just there we go. Everybody see the second slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. So the meeting overview, I'll just give an introduction about what the transportation master plan is, and then describe the consultation steps that we did to evolve to the current document, and then give a little bit of description of what we've got in there in the way the details of the project programs and policies, and then kind of next steps for where you go with this document. So for an introduction, the TMPs are both a process and a final document that allows municipalities to build a blueprint for their transportation plan for the future. It really combines the transportation plan with the land use plan and makes a cohesive document that describes what you're going to do in the future. This document, as Chris described, updates the 2008 master plan and allows us to take a look at changes in growth rates and priorities within the municipality. And the final document includes recommendations covering the network connectivity, cost affordability, maintenance operations, and safety. One of the things that's a little bit unique about this version of the TMP is it does have a section on affordability. And no municipality today can afford to build everything. So there's been priorities set. And what the affordability section does describe is that there may be extended timelines to build the most expensive pieces of infrastructure. It describes that priorities for, say, transit service would look to areas that have the highest ridership. The active transportation elements might focus on more multi-use paths, which are a lower cost initiative than bike lanes where feasible. And that in development areas, potentially development charges might be considered within the life of the plan for funding development related infrastructure. So the plan itself includes both the urban areas and the rural areas. So it's just a shot of the entire municipality. And what we tried to do this round is go sort of outside of Chatham to try to engage people from the settlement areas beyond Chatham. And I'll show that when we get to the consultation. So in the consultation, this is all part of a decision-making process. It's included in the Class EA document. And our consultation included 3 general stages. So the first was first round of consultation was us going out and listening to the community before any decisions were made, and I'll come back and talk about the community cafe. The second round was our first round of PICs, which we went out to the public to show a long list of candidate projects, policies, and programs for people to comment on to make sure we were all inclusive, allow them to add to it. And the third round that happened last fall was that we took the final plan out and asked for comments. And through each of those steps, we've tried to track any comment that came from any member of the public or stakeholder. They got tracking numbers, and they've been included in the building of these three lists of projects, programs, or policies. And we have a tracking mechanism that's followed those comments through and which ones made it into which list. And in the end, most of them have made it into the final TMP, but not all. But at least we've listened and captured all those elements of input as we went along. So I thought I'd just describe the first event, which was really successful. It was the Community Cafe event, which was the first one ever undertaken in Chatham-Kent. And it's a way that we've engaged the public by inviting them to register and come out for the evening. And we divide the members of the public up into discussion groups. And what it does is it allows one-on-one conversations between individuals, and we've got recorders at each of the table. And as I said, each of the conversations that led to ideas or suggestions was given an ID number and tracked, and many of which from these first event have made it into the final plan. It was an event that was well received, and we built great relationships with people from the very beginning. You'll see that as we walk through this. So the second round of events was our first PICs. So that just gives some of the photos of them, but we held 3 different events, and we were trying to get outside of Chatham, and we were trying to engage the public at events that weren't specifically for the TMP, so we could try to get people to cross-pollinate with another event, so they didn't have to make a special trip just to come out and see us. But by doing so, we ended up with thousands of people that had the opportunity to actually come and look and dialogue and give input, and we went into the community. So it allowed us to get outside of the urban areas to the rural areas. And then the third round, which was held last fall, we had a large number of people attended, and that's a measure of success of how well we did engaging people as we went along. Typically, by the time you get to the end of a project or EA study, you have very few people coming out, or if they do, they've got site-specific things they want to talk about or object at. But this is a location we had large room-filled capacity of attendees and members of the public that came from right from the cafe on. We had agencies, we had the Métis of Ontario. They came for an hour to the dialogue with the event as well. So it was really well received. So the end product is this dialogue is that we've built these 3 lists, so 3 categories of elements. And one is road improvement projects, and they built upon what we had in 2008. Things that haven't been implemented so far were added to the started list. We reviewed the traffic demand associated with current land use development and population thresholds, and then we set priorities. And the graphic I've got on the screen just shows one of them. And what you can see is it's a project. It's the Talbot Trail that's now led to a next EA study, but it's got a reference number, so it's shown as R44, and then it's got a time horizon for that project as well as each of the projects on the road network plans. So these plans in the TMP show up graphically to show the location of them with a reference number, and they're tied to tables that give a breakdown of limits, the project description, the class EA, and approximate timelines for implementation and costs. This is just a second one that shows urban areas in Chatham. But again, each of these are individual projects. The R1 in the center of the screen is one that was one of the larger ones from the last TMP, the Western Transportation Link. It continues to be in the plan. The timelines have probably changed for implementation, but all those projects continue to be shown in the plan. And then second set of lists are all related to active transportation. And the active transportation projects are all related to improving connectivity for pedestrians and cyclists, considering the aging populations and other recreational uses. And part of the TMP describes that the fastest growing demographic block in Chatham-Kent, in fact, is seniors. So the active transportation component was a large part. And it includes facilities such as sidewalks, multi-use paths, paved shoulders, landscaping, roadway diets. Those are each shown on their own sets of graphics in the TMP, and they've got their own tables. And we've got a couple samples here from Wallaceburg and Chatham. So many of these came from the very first events, and I've walked through the process. So the second category is not quite specific as a project, but they're policies. And these are guidelines designed to improve roadway conditions. And we've broken them into 3 different categories. But what they do is these policies can then roll into any of the projects and stay for the life of the plan. So some of the examples of planning policies would be roundabouts to be considered at any location for new signalization. So it's a better traffic operation and safety feature. So that'll be one of the policies that we've recommended. Continuous improvement to public transit, and transit was a focus of most of the public dialogue early on in the study. Promotion of ride sharing and adopting a traffic calming policy to guide the municipality. Information policies that could lead to updates on real-time road conditions, real-time transit service. People could monitor where their bus service is as they're waiting at a stop. And policies for active transportation to encourage alternate modes of travel. And a recommendation to adopt a complete streets approach, which is a policy that would give space within the right-of-way for every individual mode of transportation. And then the last category that's touched on in the TMP is programs. So these are future actions for the municipality, increase mobility, accessibility, and safety. And again, we've got 3 different categories that we've broken it down into. So many of the ideas or comments that we got in the first cafes are related to things that would fall into these programs. So programs like the annual maintenance program, we did get comments about site-specific locations for repairs. Annual paving programs, where we got comments about site-specific areas for streets to be resurfaced. And then others such as parking for the downtown, transit coordination, which might be programs to engage students for registration, traffic signal coordination, and active transportation, just to encourage the active transportation mode. And then other programs, safety and education. So education towards cyclist safety and usage, education on the traffic calming policy, education on roundabout education and how to implement, could be done on your website. And then the category of promotion and marketing to try to encourage tourism in the municipality, and that could be linked with transportation through eco-tourism. For cycling, people can come and plan a trip to Chatham-Kent, and on the web plan other activities than in their tourist stay that could include cycling trips. So what we've done is we've updated the previous plan. It's got new lists with which will be used by staff and council. All the recommended projects are now part of a formal environmental assessment process. It's been updated, as Chris described. There's 3 levels of projects. So the Schedule A projects can now proceed to construction of the Class A process now that we've done the master plan. And the Schedule B and C projects, which are a little bit more complex, will have further steps in the EA process and documentation and further community consultation as they're brought forward. In the end, the TMP will become a planning tool for staff and council, and will really be used to set capital programs in years to come. And with that, I'll leave it for questions.
Prior to opening up for questions, Councillor Sakachi, can I get a motion to put the report on the floor? And the Councillor Crew, can I get a seconder for that?
Thank you, Mayor Kiernan. I'll move that motion.
I'd be pleased to second it.
Okay, we'll open it up for questions. Any questions? Councillor Sakachi?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I greatly appreciate the brief presentation. I just had a quick couple of questions for you. So, obviously, you participate in and receive feedback from a lot of these, these open houses and cafes that you're speaking of. And I just wanted to touch base. So, for a community like Chatham-Kent, what's the best way to to kind of roll out some of these new structures that are you know, a little bit indifferent to our communities. So obviously, you know, being a more rural community, and you know, touching base on roundabouts and things like that. Do you have any recommendations that you can, you know, from an educational standpoint for our residents?
Thank you, Mayor Camp. This is Chris Teber here, Director of Engineering Transportation. And I'll let maybe I'll let Steve jump on that one first if he's able to.
Yeah, I think actually the COVID-19 experience may have helped the whole world understand the web-based education and communication. A couple things. I really am one that likes the website, some of the communication tools that we now have for getting things out. But I did want to mention we did get feedback at some of the early cafe events that like even going to nursing homes and communicating to those as well as community associations are one way to actually get out into a network of that can distribute material. So one is directly from the municipality, and one would be a secondary source where you flip it out to community associations or seniors, residents, places like that would distribute your information material.
Thank you. And the last question I have, so in all I think your report was very, very well done. I just wanted to see, like, you know, touching base on all the responses that you received, how did you feel generally about the you know, the bike path implementations in Chatham-Kent as a whole? Is it something that was very positive through your conversations, as I know that they have been included in this update?
From our perspective, the cycling groups were very active in the process. They were well engaged. Their fingerprints are all over this plan with the new links, and at the final PIC, I think we had supportive comments from all the cycling participants that came out to the study.
Thank you for your time. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that they came out and they're implementing components of the cycling network, and they wanted to progress, and they liked the thought of things that supported their cycling network, parking lots for people that wanted to come out and park and use the trails or even walk your dogs. They thought it was, you know, it brought the cycling component back to the bigger picture of the transportation network.
Thank you so much. And my last question, sorry, how much of it was our accessibility committee communicated with on this this master plan?
I think they were part of our technical advisory committee, so they were part of the steps where we had our technical side. So they were engaged as we went along and reviewed the final document as well.
Much appreciated.
If I can add to that too, thank you, Mayor Camp. So we had a technical advisory committee with kind of internal staff as well as some stakeholders like you acknowledged with the accessibility committee. But it consisted of our economic development team, our public works team, our health and family services team, parks and open spaces, our planning team, CK Fire. So there's a lot of players involved right from the beginning of this process right to the completion. And then, of course, through all the public consultation that we did and their involvement in attending these various meetings and sharing with us their input and comment throughout the whole process.
Thank you, gentlemen, and Mayor Caniff. I appreciate the time.
Councillor Latimer.
Thank you, through the mayor. I too appreciated the update and the report. I think what Councillor Sakachi was getting at is we wanted to know if you had any tips on how we could introduce and improve the positive reaction from those residents who for a lot of reasons, different reasons, don't don't really agree with roundabouts, or they have, there's opposition to the bike lanes. So do you have any tips about including these people and helping the community move forward in acceptance of this active transportation? The second question I have is, could you describe for listeners what complete streets mean? What does that look like for people, and what a road diet, what that term means? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take a shot at the 3 questions, and I made notes, so if I miss one, just have me go back. So going forward, to make some success stories, we now have a contact list of people that were engaged in the process. So if you bring in early projects, whether it be active transportation or roundabouts, you can include these people on the contact list for the first projects going forward. And we do a lot of work in roundabouts across the province. So I'll just give that as an example. We typically encourage the municipality to find a success story to be the first one to implement it. So with respect to roundabouts, we typically recommend that you implement a single lane roundabout first in a location that people can get educated and make it a success story, as opposed to implementing something that's complicated. And on our list in the TMP, we've got a policy to consider roundabouts, and we actually have a roundabout project identified, and they can be success stories. So you want to build on success stories, whether it's active transportation or roundabouts. The second question was complete streets. So this is an evolving change for considering about the road right away, where originally we had over the last 100 years evolved the road right away was predominantly to move vehicles, goods and services through autos and trucks, typically with trying to provide low delays for the vehicle. What we've done is across North America, the philosophy has changed to try to make the right of way more conducive to all modes of transportation. And to have it happen safely, it's better if cyclists and pedestrians have their own physical space in the right of way. And we'd like it to be separate from the vehicular traffic. So the discussion I had about multi-use paths, so if they're set back, in their own space, boulevard between that and the lanes, they're safer. It doesn't preclude cyclists from going on the travel lanes, which they can under the Highway Traffic Act, but it encourages more use for cycling and pedestrians if they've got their own green, clean, safe locations to be traveling along the streets. And then when you get to intersections, we try to prioritize, pedestrians and cyclists better. Roundabouts are typically a little bit safer for both cars, but also active modes of transportation as well. And the third question, if I've got it right, was just a question about road diets. So a road diet is a way to shrink the space that we've got for auto use. And it typically leads to lower traveling speeds. It can be reducing lane widths. It induces lower operating speeds, and it gives you more space to reassign within the right of way for either sidewalk widths, boulevards, or multi-use path space or cycle tracks if you've got them. So it's again very complementary to the complete street approach, where we're trying to give equal space for other modes of travel.
Thank you very much. I think that our residents are going to be hearing a lot more about these concepts going forward. And I agree with you. We need to look at how other municipalities have successfully moved these concepts forward with their residents and build on that. So thank you very much.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I just want to say that I was really impressed with the aging community being considered in there, and our efforts to make this an age-friendly community. I think that we need to also embrace the fact that we need to have an active community because we need to have a healthy community. And this transportation master plan update really just sets a roadmap for a future for people to age comfortably and health and remain active at home in our community. And it also sets the framework for the future. Young people need to have ways to get out, especially right now, right? We're looking at, we're always looking for things to do because we're stuck in the house. So these types of things make it easier, and we want to make sure that all of our community, from the young people up to the folks that are aging in our community. So we want to make sure that we consider all that. So I'm really appreciative that when I looked through it, I saw a lot of age-friendly topics in there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Seeing no more questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes. 8B, transition of the blue box to full producer responsibility resolution.
Okay, can I get a motion on to put on the floor from Councillor Solomon, and can I get a seconder from Councillor Latimer?
Yes, I'll move that and I'd like to speak to it.
And seconded, and I'd also like to speak to it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Solomon, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a question through to Mr. Kucera. I take it he's present.
Yes, he is.
Okay. The question that I'd like to ask is on behalf of most of the residential, urban residential taxpayers, and that is, will this blue box program and this resolution have any effect on the way that they take their boxes out to the streets? Is it any extra burden on them of any kind? That's it.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Councillor Solomon, specifically, although Chatham-Kent and all Ontario Blue Box communities will move to a full producer recycling program between 2023 and 2025, the Minister has assured all communities that there will be no impact whatsoever on the level of service currently being received in our community. So in other words, the answer is no. Blue Box will continue to be the way that we deliver our recycling through the CURP program.
Okay.
As well, I'd like to point out that the financial benefit to residents and businesses after transitioning is that Chatham-Kent will no longer have to pay for their recycling services, which currently are in the order of $1 million a year.
Thank you, Your Worship, Mr. Kucera. Thank you for that response. It sounds like a good news story. And can you just assure me again, there's no extra work that any person who is in their house dealing with their recycling will have to do as a result of this resolution?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. No, it's business as usual, Councillor Solomon, going forward.
With a savings?
With the savings. In fact, the savings is about $500,000 because currently we file a data call annually with the province, which basically amounts to about 50% of our costs, net costs, returned to us. But in the full producer responsibility world, it will mean that we will pay nothing for the service going forward as of 2023.
Thank you, Your Worship. Those are my questions. That's the kind of resolution I'd like to move.
Councillor Latimer.
Thank you, through the mayor. Like Councillor Solomon, Mr. Kucera, I wanted to ask you to describe what this will look like for our ratepayers. And you did say there's no changes, but are there any improvements? And I also would like to ask, with the money saved, could this be applied to optimizing our green waste practices, our compost program, and or garbage pickup for our smaller communities within our municipality?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. That was a loaded question, but to start, I think to answer Councillor Latimer's first question, the producers, once they take over 100% of all blue box recycling in Ontario, which is actually effective after the 3-year transition in 2026, they're required to standardize blue box recycling as we know it today across Ontario. So what that means is there's currently 2 programs in play in Ontario. One is the 2-stream blue box program that we see here in Chatham-Kent. The other is the single stream program where everything goes into a single toter cart, like our garbage toters, and is picked up at the curb in the same manner as garbage and then is delivered to the market. So again, there'll be a standardization of the program so that no matter where you live or who you talk to in Ontario, it's going to look similar or almost identical from one community to the next. Furthermore, the producers are also being encouraged to provide alternatives for residents and businesses, which may include additional and local take-back options and an expanded blue box in terms of the number of items actually received or currently accepted in the program. So it's very encouraging, but obviously, as you can imagine, it will take a number of years to develop, hence 2026.
So in the meantime, in the interim, is there room for us to talk about optimizing or initiating our green waste practices, or about our smaller community garbage pickup?
Thank you again, Mayor Caniff. The issue of green bin or organics diversion obviously isn't linked to blue box in any way. But it is something that the province, I believe, will be bringing forward very soon as a result of this regulation hopefully being passed by the end of the year. So to answer your question directly, I think that would be certainly Council's prerogative to use those savings towards a green bin program. Mind you, $500,000 is going to be honestly a fraction of the cost to deliver that program here in Chatham-Kent for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't have a facility that can handle that material at this time. And certainly the current program is not designed to collect green waste through the current garbage program. But blue box aside, I guess, to answer your question, green bin is certainly going to be an option for Chatham-Kent because it will be something that still forms a part of the waste collection side of the business and which we'll remain responsible for. So it's really going to boil down to, are we willing to spend the money to provide the service in a long-term future contract, or is the province going to mandate all Ontario communities to proceed with green bin or organics diversion in Ontario?
So all in time for our garbage contract to come up for renewal, correct?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yes, it would have to form a part of a future long-term waste management contract for garbage.
Very good. Thanks very much, Mr. Kazera. I'll look forward to further discussion.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes. 8C, motion by Councillor Pinsonneau, Infrastructure Committee membership. I'll remind Council that last week on May 25th, you heard one deputation received. on behalf of Harry Lawson, who is in support of Councillor Pinsonneau's motion. We won't reread that this evening, but it was emailed to council this afternoon for information. Thank you.
Councillor Pinsonneau.
Thank you, Your Worship. I, Councillor Steve Pinsonneau, move that 1, the membership of the Infrastructure Committee be realigned to add 1 member, Louis Roche, from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture to join the members of the Kent Federation of Agriculture, and 2, in the absence of either of those representatives, a substitute member of the organization be allowed to attend in their place at meetings. If I get a seconder, I got some words here.
Councillor Wright. Councillor Wright, will you second that?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yes, I'll thank you that.
Okay, back to you, Councillor Pinsonneau.
Thank you, Your Worship. The agricultural community has always been a big part of our infrastructure discussions over the years, whether it's in the budget process or just general discussion about upcoming projects. Every year we put more money into our life cycle programs, and we never seem to gain a lot of ground due to the fact that every year costs rise. We do our diligent part in adding money to the infrastructure budget, but it just seems like it's a sliding scale. With only so many infrastructure dollars to go around, we need to explore different technologies and techniques to replace bridges and road repairs and just to get a handle on costs. I believe by adding another ag representative to the committee, we'll bring a different expertise other than an engineer's perspective, and I also believe Louis would be a great addition.
Okay, I understand that Mr. Norton has some advice, some legal advice to provide for this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My concern is with regard to the second recommendation, which is to allow, in the absence of the appointed representative, other members of the organization to attend in his place at meetings. We have never appointed organizational representatives to attend. We've never appointed an organization to attend and be participant on a committee. And the problem with this is we wouldn't know which individuals actually representing the organization, you know, would they be allowed to vote and would they form part of quorum? In addition, we have a code of conduct for members of committees, and we wouldn't know which person attending the code of conduct applies to in any particular date. So this is problematic from a number of, from sort of various angles. So I have no concern at all with the first recommendation in terms of appointing a particular person to a committee. That, of course, is council's prerogative, but allowing persons just to attend and represent as a substitute, we've never done that before or allowed that. So that would create a precedent. We would have to change bylaws and that kind of thing, and would take some significant work and rethinking of how we organize our committees currently. So I wouldn't recommend that to council.
Councillor Pinsonneau, are you okay with continuing on with number 2, given the legal advice?
What if we were to, the KFA and the OFA, what if they were to appoint one member, one person to fill in the absence, where that person could have the, you know, the code of conduct training and all of the other stuff that goes along with that? Would that be acceptable if I change it to read that?
Mr. Norton?
Again, I wouldn't recommend that. Again, the problem is you're either a member of a committee or you're not. Remember that this infrastructure committee does have to conduct its meetings openly so that the public can attend these meetings. So any, you know, the entire Kent Federation of Agriculture, all the members are welcome to attend these meetings. And they can all be there and they can all make deputations, you know, depending on the format of the meeting, they should be able to have their voices heard. but to actually vote and be a part of the quorum is a concern and a problem. In addition, we do normally review resumes and vet those in closed session. And again, we wouldn't know who's a member. So we'd have to go back and rethink that. I think this is a governance question. We haven't really looked at it that way in the past. We've certainly had representation from whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or the KFA, but we've always just appointed an individual.
Councillor Pinson, do you still want to continue with number 2?
I'd like to leave it in there because I think it is doable. However, if they want to separate it out and vote on it separately, I'm okay with that.
Okay, we'll have it separated then. Councillor C. McGregor.
Councillor McGregor, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, for some reason, it said I was muted by the organizer. Yes, and if I can get a seconder, I would actually like to make a motion to refer this back to the Infrastructure Committee. It is my feeling that if a decision to add a member to a committee, then it should come from a committee, not from an outside councillor. And I understand it's not even that I disagree with the things that Councillor Pinson has said. I believe that when we set up our committees and we have members of the committee, that a decision of that scale and that size that's going to affect the committee should come from the committee and be then recommended back to council. So if I can get a seconder, I'd like to refer that back to the Infrastructure Committee.
Councillor Hall.
I'll second that motion, Mayor Caniff.
Okay. Any questions related to that motion to defer to the committee? I see Councillor Pinsino, then followed by Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I ask council, please don't let this go back to the committee. We'll be in for the same old, same old. This is a council responsibility. Council sets the committees, the size of the committees, everything. Committees don't set committees. That's our job. Please let this be voted on tonight. Vote down this deferral. Don't let the tail wag the dog. This is our responsibility. Thank you.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I just wanted to see if I could reach out to Mr. Kelly briefly. Just the terms of reference. I know that I just wanted to touch base on the terms of reference for this particular committee and see if that you can just kind of weigh on the process of of putting somebody else on the committee. I have a lot of respect for Mr. Rush. I know that he brings a lot of tangibles to the table, but I just want to make sure that I do understand what Councillor Pinsino is indicating, but I also understand that we have a lot of other people on the committee that put a lot of value in it as well. So I just wanted to see if Mr. Kelly could just weigh in a little bit about the terms of reference to this particular committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe you're talking about the membership itself, and council in 2018 approved 4 members from council to be on the committee, 3 from the agricultural community, and 3 who had an expertise in infrastructure. At this time, and at that time, we went out for public advertisements, requesting for public participation. But we had 11 candidates from the agricultural committee, of which one the candidate you're referring to here was part of that list. And from that, council made a decision on the 3 to choose. At this time, we have only 2 in the expert category because we have been unable to fill 1 open position. And we do have 3 currently from the agricultural community, of which 1 is a representative from the KFA.
So I'm correct in saying that there was other applicants back in 2018 then, is that correct?
That's correct. There were a total of 11 applicants originally, which we went through a scoring matrix based on their expertise in infrastructure and their experience, also their involvement in the community. We rated those candidates. We shared those ratings in front of council, and council made a decision on the top 3 candidates to be members of the committee.
So my last question to you, Mr. Kelly. So then, if another agriculture member just added to the committee, is this something that would then change the scope from a municipal standpoint? Should another councillor be added due to the numbers? Like, I'm afraid to support this just because not knowing exactly how that matrix came by, and I would hate to see somebody who is equally impressive regarding to their abilities kind of be waved over based on emotion. So I'm just trying to look for some clarification. Is there a way for us to, if this is deferred, to have that matrix be put back to council to see exactly where that matrix was at the time?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have the matrix, and I could absolutely share that with council in closed session if you would like.
If the motion is deferred, I would like to see the matrix as well. In speaking with with Louis, I do know that he is, like I said, would be a very good asset to the committee. It's just that I do want to make sure that everybody has a fair and equal opportunity to sit on that if we are expanding it by a member. Thank you.
Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just for clarification, would that mean that we have 4 agricultural representatives if we approve number 1 of this notice of motion?
Yes, that's what it would mean, Councillor Foss. There would be
Okay,
4
so that-
agricultural, 3 professional, and 4 councillors.
Okay, and I guess that would change the whole structure of that committee then by adding the 4th, because it stipulates only 3 ag members.
That's correct. The current terms of reference that was approved by council is, as the clerk noted, 4 from council, 3 from the ag community, and 3 experts, and that would increase the ags to 4. And as well, we only have 2 members of the expert community based on we're just unable to attract another member.
Yeah, I would support it going back to the committee or even back to closed session, because that puts an improper balance, I guess, on the agricultural side compared to the rest of the committee. Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. It was just stated a few minutes ago that the council makes the decisions for the committee. If we put this back to the infrastructural committee, how can they add somebody to if it's, because we were just told that it was council that added people to their committee. So I'm just got it confused here. So maybe somebody can explain that to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are 4 councillor members on the committee itself. And the intent when it was originally set up was that those councillors would represent the thoughts and the wishes of council on the committee. So I believe this is the proposal from Councillor McGregor, that those 4 councillor members who attend all the meetings, along with the remaining members, make that decision of what would be most effective for the committee.
Okay, Councillor Solomon, followed by Councillor C. McGregor.
Councillor Solomon, we can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes, we can now. Thank you.
Okay. Through your worship to Mr. Kelly, who are the 2 professional members currently sitting?
The 2 expert committee members?
Yes.
Yes. The expert committee members are Dave Sharon. He is an Enbridge employee, a former employee at the municipality who was engaged in bridge design and construction. And the other expert committee is Bob Little. Also, he's a retired Enbridge employee, former vice president of their technology and engineering group at Enbridge.
And was the other person who you had on the committee in the expert category also an engineer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it was Mr. Jim Steele. Mr. Jim Steele had the most significant experience in infrastructure design. He's a former consultant in the industry, and unfortunately, he passed away.
Yes. And when this committee was first set up, was it designed to have that balance?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly the way it was structured. That the initial focus, you may recall, for some of you who were on the council at that time, was it was going to be balanced with both agriculture and infrastructure experts. And the intent was the two of those groups together with council would come up with recommendations on the process that we currently use, look for opportunities to improve our effectiveness.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Councillor C. McGregor, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
I seem to have a challenge with this button. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of comments that were out there and reinforce what Mr. Kelly had said, that the council has elected 4 of us to sit at that committee, and I believe it the proper procedure, whether it be our infrastructure committee, whether it be any committee within council, that once our councillors are there at that, then we are there to represent the rest of council. And if there's to be a decision and a change to the makeup of the committee, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong to do it, and I'm not even saying it's right or wrong, I'm not completely comfortable with just appointing one person without discussing with the committee and with the industry in general. But I think that it is a decision that the committee makes, and then we make a referral back to council if we choose to change the makeup and direction of the committee. And the committee actually hasn't had the opportunity to fully meet on a regular basis. So I think it's even more important that we discuss where we're going and what our needs are, especially with our cutbacks in the direction that we've been going in the last number of months. So I would appreciate if everybody would consider that and have this motion deferred back to the infrastructure committee to deal with. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes to refer back to the infrastructure committee.
Item 9, tender awards.
Revised tender award, contract T20-105C, cold in place recycling with expanded asphalt material.
Councillor Foss, would you put it on the floor? And Councillor B. McGregor, would you second that?
Yes, also move, Your Worship.
I'll second that.
Okay, seeing no questions, we'll put it to vote.
One sec, council, we just need to enter it into the software. 1 second, please. Okay, council, please vote now. All votes are in. Motion passes.
Item 10, corporate services.
10A, staffing impacts related to COVID-19.
Okay, Councillor Latimer, followed by Councillor Harrigan. Can I get a motion and seconder?
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, Councillor Latimer, to you, and then Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, through the mayor. I noted, as the report says, that we've have 1,879 employees, and that 333 of them, or 20%, have been laid off. What are the actual cost savings to this?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's Kathy Hoffman, General Manager of Corporate Services here. And this might be a question actually that we may want our CFO, Mr. Quinton, to comment on. Right now, we have not calculated all of the savings related to staff who are laid off or on leaves, because we also have other staff that are moving about into other positions. So we have not yet finalized a costing or a savings related to these as of yet. Mr. Quinton, would you like to add anything more to that at this point?
Thank you, Kathy. It's Gord Quinton, CFO. I just wanted to add that there's been a lot of switching around of staff, of repositioning them in areas of need, such as over at Riverview Gardens and other areas. So it's all, we instantly know what we're saving in not hiring the student population. That's about $1.2 million. The rest, we'll be able to analyze that better over time, and we'll have more information for you the next time we present the financial implications of COVID-19. We were looking to do that after our June variance reporting, where all the departments in detail would put in their any variance from budgets, whether that's additional costs related to COVID-19 or these savings.
Thank you, Mr. Quinton, for that update and the timeline provided. Do we foresee any further layoffs or redeployments occurring?
Your Worship, that really comes down to a couple of things. One of which, if council were to decide to alter some of the levels of service of the other services that we have ongoing right now, that may have a corresponding reaction from a staffing perspective. The other thing that we're seeing, though, is a little bit of the shift now with things starting to slowly open up, businesses and other services starting to come alive again. We do expect that we're going to be shifting and probably bringing back some of the employees that have been off. So does that answer your question, Councillor Latimer?
It does. Thank you very much, Ms. Hoffman.
You're welcome.
Councillor Harrigan. Oh, Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor Thompson. Sorry, Councillor Latimer, were you done? I apologize if I cut you off.
Oh, no, I was finished. Thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I believe my question is for Ms. Huffman. Kathy, in some of the areas, as the report outlines, we've seen staff redeployed, but as you just mentioned, there is the possibility, as the province loosens restrictions, that staff may either need to come out of being laid off or would have to return to their kind of home base, whatever that may be. So with all of that shifting, do you anticipate that there could be a possibility for us actually having to increase our staff within the municipality?
Thank you, Your Worship. There is a possibility of that, Councillor Harrigan. As we start to take our redeployed staff, move them back to their home-based places, There is the potential in places like Riverview Gardens, as an example, where we have done a fair bit of work to make sure that we have contingency plans there in the event that there was an outbreak or in the event that staff started to become ill. Or also now in the event that we need to continue to prepare for the prospects of a second wave in the fall as we hear it. So we will want to make sure that we keep a certain level of staffing there that will be available to be able to take these surges and to cover if that happens. So if we have a scenario under which redeployed staff start to go back to their home places and we still need to keep this level of staffing at Riverview Gardens, then yes, we would be posting externally for positions if it came to that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. So just in follow-up to that, is that something that council would need to review because they would be considered kind of net new positions, or is that something operationally that would be handled?
Thank you, Your Worship. So council we typically come to council when we are looking at hiring permanent FTEs. In this particular situation, if we're hiring contract FTEs or contract employees, don't need to refer to them as a full-time equivalent because they might not be a full-time equivalent, we would be coming back to council for additional staffing, even for that temporary basis.
Okay, thank you. And then just a final question. I know that a lot of staff were redeployed initially to help our communities understand social distancing practices. I had the pleasure of seeing my child's ECE worker when visiting the Valletta garbage station when I was doing my garbage and recycling, who was helping just to navigate cars. But I think as we've been living in the COVID world now for some time, there's less of that navigation needed. It's kind of become the new norm. Have we, as a municipality, thought through some of that with the redeployments? Like, are we evaluating and reevaluating constantly where our redeployed staff are to make sure that we're supporting the community in the best way that we can?
Thank you, Your Worship. I might answer that in a two-part way. If your question is really directed around community-based assistance, Councillor Harrigan, then I might defer to my colleague April Reedike to respond to that. Can I just ask you for clarification if that's your ask?
Yeah, like I'll be more blunt. Are we making sure that when we're putting people in a position to help navigate traffic or keep people distant in the work that they're doing in the municipality, how are we being really diligent to make sure that those positions for redeployment are the best use of our decision making for where people need to go to help with social distancing or other what I would call social trafficking type of positions?
Right, thank you. So I'll take that question then. So in any area of our organization, whether it's Riverview Gardens, as we've spoken about tonight, or pick any department that we have here, we have gone through with each general manager and had conversations about how best we would go about protecting employees and residents or customers if we still have them in whatever way, shape, or form. And so every business unit, every service that we still provide, all had to be considered in terms of what is required. So for example, if you were still receiving some customer service work at our Service Ontario office or here at the Civic Center, then we have put a series of protocols in place to make sure that staff are protected, whether that's through plexiglass, whether that's through distancing, whether that's through drop-off boxes, whatever the case may be. In areas like Riverview Gardens and other places, We have made sure we've followed the public health protocols on whatever kind of distancing equipment, et cetera, that has been required. So absolutely, yes, we make sure that when we bring employees into a redeployment, first we make sure that they're suitable for that environment and that they don't have, you know, something personally going on that would make them vulnerable in any one particular area. And so that we're not placing them in those locations. And then we're making sure that they're trained for what the role is that we've asked them to fill, and that we're providing them with the equipment that they need. Does that answer your question, Councillor Harrigan?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for this report. I think it is certainly helpful for myself as a councillor to have this type of transparent description when people do ask me questions about what's the current state for municipal workers. And also thank you for the direction that you've given staff. And in all of my interactions as a citizen with the staff of CK during the COVID crisis and our new normal, there have been lots of smiles, lots of positivity, lots of encouragement. And I think that our community members really appreciate that as well. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you for that feedback.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. How many of the 333 people that are either redeployed, laid off on unpaid leave or student positions, how many of them were either provincially or federally subsidized?
Your worship, I'll see if I can maybe help with part of this. So out of the 333, I'm not sure how many of our student positions are subsidized. I would have to lean to my colleagues in finance or in April's area for that particular answer. But a number of employees in the community services, human services area are provincially funded. However, those that we took from, say, for example, in our arts and culture area, or some of those that we redeployed from our library area, those are not provincially subsidized. We did have some that we redeployed from the public health unit, and they are subsidized. And perhaps I'll pause there and see if my colleagues would like to jump in further on that.
Hi, it's Gord. Just from the page appendix A of your report, there were 26 members in April, 26 students in community human services, where there'd be potentially subsidy attached to those students.
Okay, a little difficult to hear you there, Gord. The mayor of Windsor was on CBC Morning recently talking about how they were getting ready to ramp up hiring their summer students for a number of different positions. And when pressed, he said that a lot of their wage was covered by the province and the feds. Is that not the case in Chatham-Kent?
So, Your Worship, we often receive grant funding for summer students. So, sorry, Councillor Thompson, I didn't understand your question. I thought you were asking about some of the funding that we have in some of our public health areas, and when you were asking that question. So many of our student positions do receive funding depending on the given year, depending on you apply for applications, and both the provincial and federal governments review our requests, every municipality's requests, on an annual basis, and they make decisions about how many positions would be funded or not. And so that really varies year to year. I don't have with me handy what last year's were as an example. That's certainly something I could take a look at and provide you with in a subsequent day if that would be helpful.
Yeah, it certainly would. The only reason I bring it up is because when I look at the list here, the vast majority of the positions are coming from students. And I'm just wondering what the economics and what the cost savings are there if we're not hiring people, some people that need to make some money for subsequent school years, and we're not seeing a cost saving. So I would like to see some documentation on that, Kathy.
So sorry, Councillor, I just was able to look up while we were speaking. We actually had only 4 employees who were eligible for summer student positions for which we were eligible for grants this year.
Okay. just in general, when we talk about unpaid leave, is this a longer term unpaid leave, or is this any unpaid leave at all?
Thank you, Your Worship. Are you referring to the number of employees on unpaid
Yes.
leave from the table on page
For-
2 of the report?
Yes, I certainly am. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't have to get into
Yes.
specifics there, but there's a difference
Sure.
between I took a week off versus I took 3 months off.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for the question. So this particular area is the declared emergency leave that the province made available to employees who meet the criteria. And so it could be a combination. An employee may be off either because their workplace or their work closed as a result of orders from the provincial government, and or it could be that they are caring for a family member, or that they may have some of their own health issues, etc. So the length of time that an employee might be off on this unpaid leave really revolves around the length of the pandemic. So we have had employees that have been off for a few weeks, and we've had employees that have been off for the duration of the pandemic and are still off, and whom I would expect will remain off until we start to go back to a renewed level of normalcy.
Okay. Moving on to the redeployment of staff. I noticed the bottom two, Erie Shore Drive for road security and Mitchell's Bay South Trail. Where have they been subsequently redeployed, since I don't believe either of those two responsibilities currently are continuing?
They would have gone back to their regular positions, Councillor Thompson.
Okay. What's going on with our hiring process right now? Have we put things on hold, or what's continuing? Specifically, I was sent a note about a manager of drainage. That job was posted. There were some people quite upset in the community, basically for the optics. We're going through this crisis, but we're continuing to hire.
Right. So right now what we're doing with every vacancy that comes up is we take a look at that vacancy and we do some analysis around whether or not that position needs to be filled because it is maintaining a level of service or continuing a project for which council has already approved and has some time connection to it. You know, construction projects and things like that come to mind. As you know, council has continued to meet electronically. You've advanced business, perhaps different than other communities have. And so we've continued to post positions that we need the people to fill those for. But before we advertise them or fill them, we first take a look around in our organization, and particularly in the areas where we again have either canceled programs or closed facilities due to provincial requirements all related to the pandemic. And if we have people who are suitable and available, or suitable enough in the sense that with some small amount of training we can redeploy them into these roles, then we do that. And if we do not have that combination, then we continue to follow our recruitment process and make those available to the public to apply. And I did just want to go back for one brief second, if I might, Councillor Thompson, just the couple of people as well that you just asked me about that were on our trails, our Erie Shore Drive and the Parks and Open Spaces, the Mitchell's Bay South Trail. Just done a double check here in my notes, and we've actually redeployed them over to Riverview Gardens and the isolation center right now.
Okay. I believe Thomas is on the line. Maybe I had reached out last week in regards to this manager of drainage. Unfortunately, I never heard back. I understand people are busy. Maybe Thomas could explain why this role needs to move forward at this time. Again, the optics are maybe different than the reality of the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Council, we discussed this at budget, as you may recall, and this position was put forward based on the conditions we currently have within Chatham-Kent, and also the DMAF funding that we received from the government of $16 million over the next 10 years. We have well over 40 projects, really 40 new projects that we're undertaking as a result of this funding from the federal government. And just the extremely high water levels, all of the work that we're doing in the community, and on drainage, and then finally the funding we received from the federal government. We put that position forward that was approved at budget time in February. So it's just the reason is extreme amount of workload that we currently have now, and secondly is just the funding was available as well on these projects, so we wanted to take advantage of that. Thank you.
Okay. No, I understand that. I understand that we approved it at budget, although I might argue that everybody's start of the year budget is way different now in the private sector as well. Where does the funding come from this position? How are we paying for it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is coming from the general tax base.
All right. I very much appreciate the comments. Those are all my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sakachi, followed by Councillor Finn.
Thank you, Your Worship. Some of my questions have been answered by Councillor Thompson. I guess my one main question I do have remaining is to Mr. Quinton. Mr. Quinton, so since we're talking about such a large number of redeployed staff, and since so many of those are basically, directed based on COVID and reallocating certain scenarios and preparing for, worst case, maybe potentially. So are we tracking that from a municipal standpoint to ensure that when this is, starts to maybe calm down a little bit more, that we're able to go to the province to see this is what we put forward, and look to get some fundings for those positions that we've had to create?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just doing a sound check first. Am I sounding better now?
Yes, you are, Gordon.
Perfect. Yes, we are tracking all costs related to COVID. Keep in mind with some of this reallocation, you are the job and the individual is being paid based on their pay in their regular position, and perhaps not what the pay would be valued at if it was starting from scratch position that was properly valued. So there is some inequities there. We are, of course, across the province, we are all municipalities are lobbying the federal and provincial governments for COVID-19 funding. How they there's been no announcements yet on how they would fund things. I suspect it will be different in a lot of the community human services area, where if I gave an example at Riverview Gardens, perhaps they do a top up by number of residents versus our actual costs. So they might make some allowances or things like that. So I think that it's going to be very complicated on how they. There's a lot of complicated ways on how it might be reported back to the province or federal governments. That's where I actually, in the end, expected the payments to become in a much simpler manner, and that was the FCM's recommendations when we're stating do it on a population and a number of transit users basis only, and get the money flowing quickly rather than spend 6 months analyzing and auditing worksheets and worksheets of stats from every single municipality across Canada. So that's sort of where we're at. It's a waiting game now. Today, the Prime Minister again made promises that funding will be coming. Premier Ford has made the same commitments, but with details to follow, and we're still in a waiting game. And while I have the floor, I just want to correct Thomas's the last statement he said with the manager of drainage. It was actually funded from other sources, so it wasn't a tax-funded position. I opened the budget and am looking at the line item. It was funded from other increased revenues in the drainage area.
Thank you, Gordon. And I guess my last question to you, just for clarification purposes. So with the amount of redeployed, and maybe it might be Ms. Hoffman or Ms. April Redike, sorry, Dr. Redike to comment, but there is a significant area where we've seen a very, very large, extremely large volume of redeployment. Since Chatham-Kent has been very diligent, with Dr. Colby and Dr. Reedike and her team, not seeing a major impact. Are we going to continue to see that large of an amount of redeployment to specified areas? Just because I think that it's that significant number. I just want to see at the end of the day, how is that budget's going to be allocated at the end of the year? And is it going to be moved to specific departments, or is those people who are redeployed going to still maintain the category that they're actually the position they're supposed to be in? If that question makes sense, I'm just curious to see how that's going to work.
So thank you, Mayor Caniff. I'll answer a bit of that, and then I'll turn it over to April. A lot of it, which April will be talking about, is the requirements that the province has put on the homes and about who can and cannot be in Riverview Gardens. So that caused us to act very quickly when many of our contractors were no longer allowed into the building. And with some of our facilities closed, we were quickly able to make that change. Now that we're heading into a new normal, which may be for 12, 18, 24 months, who knows? It would be, we'd have to hear from the province if there's any new direction, but I think I'll pass it to April for comments.
Thank you, Gord. Sorry, I couldn't get my mic to unmute. Through you, Mayor Caniff, just making sure people can hear me.
Yes, you're good, April. Go ahead.
Thanks, Judy. So a couple of comments in response to Councillor Sakachi's kind of statements and questions. Certainly, and probably even a step back with that. Certainly with a number of our provincially funded programs, the vast majority of them have already been indicated fall within community human services. We are diligently tracking our COVID-19 response for public health, both for our own public health programming and any public health staff that have been redeployed. We have to apply for funding. There is funding available for us for the 2020 year, and the province has opened that up. They will be providing additional details as to how we are able to submit to the province our overages that we have, extraordinary expenses related to COVID. For employment and social services, specifically with the shelter, we have been provided funding from the government for the shelter costs. So again, we are tracking those costs and the costs of both location and staffing and food, et cetera, to make that run. Those costs are provincially funded. For a number of our other programs that we receive federal and or provincial funding for, we have cleared it with all of our funders that we can do what I want to say some half and half. They are allowing us to redeploy staff for a couple of days and keep them also doing a couple of days in their funded program areas in order to maintain our funding and not claw back any of our provincial and federal funds. For Riverview Gardens, it still remains unclear how much funding we will receive, but we are tracking all time spent by staff at Riverview Gardens. Every week, Mary Alice and I, well, every week, every other week, depending on how busy things are, we review our staffing model and really look at the number of redeployed staff. How are the RVG staff adjusting They are certainly busy and working a huge number of hours. And then as things come back online, a good example is our Early On program. We've been directed by the province to bring Early On back online virtually for the foreseeable future. So we pulled those staff back and have readjusted our staffing model of our redeployed staff, putting them in areas of most need. But I do want council to appreciate that every week before COVID-19, we had approximately 500 individuals, family members, and volunteers that assisted with a significant amount of resident work that we don't have right now. So when you have a home the size of RVG, it takes literally an army worth of numbers to provide care and keep those residents safe. So the redeployed staff are doing work so that the RVG staff, the RPNs, the RNs, the PSWs, and all of our support staff can really provide that one-on-one care to residents for that. So I hope that helps in terms of answering, but we revisit that staffing model on a regular basis as we begin to open up in the community and need to pull staff back to their regular jobs.
Thank you, Dr. Edick. I really greatly appreciate that response, and I do want to commend your team on the how rapid you guys you put in some actions, and I think that from a public health standpoint, you guys are doing an absolute amazing job, and it is good to hear that you're tracking everything to ensure that if funding is available, we can maximize our efforts to receive funding back. So kudos to you and your team, and hopefully at the end of the day that the upper levels of government can see all the tangible work that you guys put forward, and we can receive a lot of that funding back. So I appreciate your response greatly.
Councillor Finn, followed by Councillor C. McGregor.
Well, my question was already answered, but just some clarification through you, Mayor, to Kathy Hoffman. When you stated you had 4 student positions that were funded, could you clarify possibly how many you had applied for?
Let me just double check the number for you that we applied for, Councillor Finn, sorry, through your worship. I will say, just as I'm taking a look for that, we have typically on an annual basis, we get approved about 18 positions, 18 summer student positions that are usually what we would get funding for through the provincial or federal government. So that would be the typical number that we would be applying for. And that was the number, in fact, I'm just double checking here. That was the number that we did apply for this year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor. I just wanted to thank Kathy for the detailed report and April for the detailed explanations that have come out. And I very much appreciate the information. I know a number of us have been asked about what's going on, so it's the report is very timely and very much appreciated. And I just wanted to say thank you for that. And thank you for all the hard work you're doing.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I certainly appreciate your comments, and I know that our staff team appreciate that as well, so thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
One more. All votes are in. Motion passes. 10B, 311 Implementation Plan.
Councillor Kirkwood White, could I have you put on the floor, and Councillor Latimer, can I have you second it?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to move that motion to receive the information report, and then I have a couple of comments.
And I'd be glad to second that with a question. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I first want to mention that these things don't happen overnight, and I want to express my thanks to Leanne Segrin-Swayze, our Director of Customer Service, and Kathy Hoffman for the information report tonight. It's interesting that the CRTC designated the number 311 for use across Canada for non-emergency municipal city services in 2004. And Calgary was the first community in Canada to use 311 in 2005, followed shortly by Windsor. So it's a good thing that people are patient when it comes to waiting for good things to happen. I wanted to express my thanks to Alana Wills, who wrote an article for Blackburn News last Monday when the report would have come to council if we hadn't had such a long agenda. And I just have a couple of questions for Leanne and or Kathy with regard to the comments that were in the information report. The first being, were you able to stay within budget? And I had asked the question about soft launching 311 prior to the hard launch in October, but wanted to have other people understand what is involved in the soft launch and what we'll be doing between now and October 7th when we go live.
Your Worship, it's Kathy Hoffman. If Leanne's still online with us, I'd like to give her an opportunity to reply to those questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is Leanne Segrin-Swayze, Director of Customer Service. So first question, the budget-related question of $5,000, which was designated for the promotional material and educational material for the public, which is required through CRTC to ensure that the public, the community in general, is aware of the implementation of 311 in the community, as well as the purpose for all N11 numbers. So it is our responsibility to ensure that our residents know when to call 911, 311, 411, those types of educational details. So at this point, because we are just entering the phase now where the telephone service providers are doing the programming, we have not initiated any type of promotional material of which would use that $5,000 budget. However, at this point, with our plans and intentions for the promotions, we do not see exceeding the $5,000 budget. Second question in relation to the soft launch prior to go live. So at this point, for the last couple of weeks, actually, the telephone service providers were given the go-ahead to start the programming, in which that means that all of the telephone service providers are responsible to do their own programming so that when their customers use or dial 311, it will come to the appropriate numbers to Chatham-Kent. So it would actually go, if they dial 311, it goes to 360-1998, for example. So they're all doing their own work at this point, and they do require a number of months to do that. Some may actually be able to complete that programming rather quickly. Therefore, we would call that a soft launch. So for example, one of our telephone service providers locally could be Rogers or Bell. If any of our residents, if they are done doing the programming early and our residents dial 311, they could actually reach us. So that's why they called that period the soft launch. So we have asked all telephone service providers to be ready for soft launch September 11th, which is a Friday, and that allows us a few weeks of testing on our end and to make sure that all of the programming is functioning properly with the telephone service providers prior to the October 7th launch. I wish we could go live a little bit earlier, but at this point, we are required to allow them 6 months to complete that programming. As mentioned, some may be complete early, in which we could possibly move the soft launch date up, but at this point, it is scheduled for September 11th.
Thank you very much, Leanne. I appreciate that.
You are welcome.
Councillor Latimer, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Thank you through the mayor to Leanne. Just to follow up on Councillor Kirkwood-White's question. So I am concerned that people are not going to know the difference between 211 and 311, because 211 is our municipal services, right? Community information, and 301 is used to access municipal services and information. So that's my first concern, and I wonder if you could address that. The second is, what is, with regard to the telephone service providers, I'm understanding that after October 7th, they are going to be the ones delivering this service, right? And they would be getting the background or the training in our community services and in social service in general. Is that correct? And do the same telephone service providers answer this 311 number during the day and night? It's 24-hour service?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the question, Councillor. We do have, so the difference between 211, I just want to clarify. So 211 is a social services resource for the community. So that is more, community-based for that type of service. So that is part of this educational piece that we are responsible for ensuring prior to going live on October 7th. So we do have a number of very creative ideas to capture all age groups in our community so that they're well aware of what each of those services are intended for. So that is something that we are focusing on right now, and we're taking this time prior to October time period to ensure that, we have everything covered and the appropriate material for that training and education of our public. And the second question is in relation to, I just want to make sure that I understand your question. So the telephone service providers, once they do their programming, basically the customers will contact, or citizens will contact our team at Chatham-Kent, so our call center, essentially, the same team that we have answering the calls at 519-360-1998 now. So it is the same service that we are providing now. And so the training essentially will just be for, if a call comes in for, we'll say, Moravian Town or County of Elgin, and those calls should be going to them, we would simply transfer to them and have that agreement with those municipal jurisdictions. But I just want to clarify that once the telephone service providers do their programming, they're out. There's no other work required of them because the programming is set to come right to us.
So can I ask, who's answering the phone after 4:30 and on the weekends?
So no one will be answering the calls, similar to our service level now. It would still continue to be the 8:30 to 4:30, Monday to Friday, similar to right now. The customers will have the option, however, to send an email at any time. So that would be our next phase, is to hopefully we'll have an email address set up for 311, CK311, for example. So customers can certainly send that to us. For any emergency matters, that would go right to the, I shouldn't say emergencies, but if it was a water main break or public works emergency, for example, similar to our service now, we identify on our voicemail what number to call. So that will continue as well.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Thompson, did you have a question?
No, my questions have been answered, actually. Thank you very much.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes.
Item 11, community development.
11A, Digital Main Street Grant Program Update.
Councillor Latimer, would you put it on the floor? And Councillor Hall, will you second that?
So moved.
Seconded, Mayor Caniff, absolutely.
Okay, Councillor Latimer?
Yes, thank you for the mayor. I just wondered, were we checking back with the businesses, especially the 225 businesses who chose not to pursue this digital training prior to the pandemic happening? I mean, it was very timely, but wondered if we were, I assume we're checking back with everyone, but most especially those 225 businesses who chose not to.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. This is John Norton, General Manager of Community Development, and I would like to refer this question to my colleague, Jamie Rainbird, who is the Manager of Economic Development, and that team has been doing an excellent job with this program. I'm very proud of it, and I'm sure that Jamie now can answer your questions.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Thanks for the questions. Just before I answer that, I wanted to take the opportunity to give you a quick update on the numbers since this report was originally written about a month ago. At the time, I just want to let you know, as of Friday, we are now up to 51 businesses who have received the grants of $2,500 each to the Digital Main Street program, totaling $127,500. Now, specifically to your question, yes, absolutely. There were a number of businesses contacted that chose not to go through the program for a variety of reasons. Many of those businesses actually fell outside of the BIA high density business regions. This program was, because it was sponsored through the Ontario BIA Association, was only specifically for specific regions in Chatham-Kent that were determined during the application process. So absolutely, the plan is to go back to those businesses specifically regarding our new proposed grant program to make sure that they have the opportunity that, perhaps they were not allowed to get through the Digital Main Street program to begin with. Likewise, the businesses that did receive the grants have up until end of August to go through the program and actually utilize those funds. So there will be a lot of follow-up with them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. I think it's wonderful. It was very timely, and I think nobody can disagree that anyone who made use of this program had a step up with regard to maintaining or pivoting their business with greater ease. I'm just wondering, you said this program would continue with one extra staff member until November 2020. Is one extra staff member enough, viewing the number of businesses that would require this nimbleness and pivoting their business virtually?
Yes, through Mayor Caniff, thank you for that question. Yes, it is a great question. Obviously, we're trying to be as thrifty as possible. Our EDO2s, who are our active officers on the small business side, will definitely take the lead. It's our belief that we will be able to do that. We also have somebody from another department that is currently with us for a period of time until they're recalled to their other job. And yes, so it's our intent to do that. John, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Mayor Caniff, I just want to jump in there because I was listening intently to the conversation earlier about employees and layoffs, and I just wanted
Right.
to indicate that our department has found an increase in workload. I can report that our number of building permits is as high as it was before the COVID crisis. We did have a decrease, but we're now seeing as many building permits as ever, as businesses are really taking off with construction. We're also seeing an increase and a continued growth in applications in planning department. And likewise, the economic development department has seen an increase. There's been no shortage of work for us, and I appreciate the question, and we will come back to council if council's prepared to provide us more resources. We can come back and provide more information about that.
Thanks for that update, John. I also have one last question. How are you marketing this available grant through Economic Development Services, the 20 grants for $1,500 to each of the Chatham-Kent small businesses to assist with their digital conversion and or advancement on top of this program that you're currently running?
Yes, thank you, through Mayor Caniff. Essentially, we haven't marketed it at all yet. Until this went through council, our intent would be to begin doing so primarily through social media, as well as through contacting businesses that have previously been contacted with regards to our Digital Main Streets program. I do believe that we have a database significant enough that we'll be able to do that, and certainly we'll be encouraging people to call us as well. I should also add that the Digital Main Streets program, although it is done at the moment at the provincial level, is seeking additional funding, and they have. We remain positive and hopeful that should they obtain more funding in the future, we'll be able to carry forward with that program potentially.
Thank you for your hard work, and please extend that to your entire team. Everyone in Chatham-Kent appreciates those boots on the ground, especially over the past 3 months.
Thank you very much.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes.
Item 12, Community Human Services.
12A, municipal policies to encourage development of affordable housing in Chatham-Kent, RFP number R18-280 report.
Councillor Kirkwood White, can I get a motion to put this on the floor, and can I get a seconder from Councillor Latimer?
Yes, happy to move the motion, and I have a couple of questions.
Pleased to second.
Okay, Councillor Kirkwood White, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. When I was reading this report, things were sounding a little familiar, and I had talked to our Director of Housing Services, Shelley Wilkins, and she said, yes, in fact, a number of the recommendations that are in this report were incorporated into the community improvement plan that we just approved. Wondering about consideration being given to an increase in funding for the home ownership program, which doesn't currently have any funds in it, and wondering whether that might dovetail into the second part of the motion with regard to the increase that's being requested. Also, there is a reference in the Bink Consulting report on partnerships, section on community land trusts, and I know that the task force is also talking about land development corporations, and just wondering whether either Shelley or John Norton might be able to comment on the difference between the two, and whether this is something that will be pursued through the task force or another department.
Well, Thank you, Your Worship. It's Shelley Wilkins, the Director of Housing Services. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me.
We can hear you, Shelley.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. Yes, so with respect to your first question about whether or not any of the funding that's proposed in recommendation number 2 is whether or not any of that could be used towards home ownership funding. It certainly could. It's not my recommendation at this point for the reasons that I set out in the report. Due to the increased average price of homes and the increased level of income that's required to be able to afford the higher cost homes, we're not really dealing with low incomes anymore. We're getting into moderate incomes. And I guess I was of the opinion, and the administration team that worked on this, we all agreed that we want to focus the funding on helping the low income families. So if the housing prices in the future come down, I could see us getting active in that again in the future, but not at the moment. And this is the same kind of approach that I've seen being taken across the province in the GTA area and in other areas like in cottage country, et cetera, where housing prices have skyrocketed. Those service managers have bowed out of the home ownership program for now because of that reason. As far as the second question goes, I'm not sure I entirely understand your question, Councillor Kirkwood-Wright, but we in the report are recommending that we support and encourage community land trust development. At the time, the Opportunity Villages Community Land Trust Group had not been established yet at the time that the VINC study was being done. We don't know for sure. We haven't had that conversation with the board to fully understand whether or not it's geared towards affordable housing in the terms that the council has adopted previously with the housing and homelessness report. And there's an updated version also coming to council. So I think if the community land trust that's been established, if they're going to abide by and comply with what we have determined to be affordable, then I would see no reason why we couldn't attempt to support that group with whatever development that they're doing. But we would need some further discussion on that with the group.
That's great. That's exactly what I'd like to hear. Thanks very much, Shelley.
Councillor Solomon.
Councillor Solomon, we can't hear you.
You're too small for my hands.
There you go.
I have some comments rather than questions. This is a very detailed and lengthy report. But at the end of the day, for today, it's really about referring this back to administration for some more reports in specific areas. And that's what I think we should do rather than go through each one of these recommendations this evening. But I do have one specific comment, and that is that I hope that when we're doing this, we don't try to shoehorn development into existing development neighborhoods without the good planning process and getting comments from the public well in advance. Some of the recommendations also are the kind that you should get some public input from potential developers as well. And it looks like from your recommendations that that's exactly what you're trying to do, is that you don't expect us to do anything tonight except receive the report and follow the recommendations that you have, which are really to bring back other reports. Am I correct in that, Shelley? Hello?
Yes. Thank you, Your Worship. Just unmuting myself. Yes, in answer to your questions, Councillor Solomon, it is to basically referring the planning recommendations back to the Director of Planning, the budget recommendations to the 2021 budget for consideration, and then the other reports to do with the surplus properties back to the Chief Financial Officer for recommendations back to Council.
That's exactly what I thought. So there's really nothing to be gained by going through each one of these tonight. Rather, it's our time would be much better spent when the reports come back from the referrals. Correct? Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
A couple more. Just waiting for one more councillor. All votes are in. Motion passes.
Okay, item 13, approval of communication items. There are 4 items that Councillor Latimer has asked to be pulled. Item 2A, 2C, 3A, and 3D. Is there any other items that people would like to be pulled? Hearing none, Councillor Oche, will you move the items not pulled, and Councillor Pinson, will you second that?
I will.
I'll second it.
Anyone opposed? Carried. Over to you, Councillor Latimer, for the 4 items that you have pulled.
Thank you, through the mayor. Just for the 2A, the connecting links, what programs would this squash, or did it any? We didn't get this money. Or what
Mr. Mayor, it's
projects?
Thomas Kelly, the General Manager of Infrastructure and Engineering Services. Can you repeat the question? I understand you're asking
Sure.
about connecting links, but why we didn't get the funding?
No, I'm just asking the particular projects, if any, would be squashed by not getting this anticipated funding.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it was our intention to do some additional road work out on Grand Ave, leading out to essentially the intersection with Prince Albert. And that's a road that needs to be upgraded. With any connecting link, they pay for 90% of the investment. And this is the second year in a row, actually, we've been declined. Previously, we were on a rotation of every other year we would get funding. And so we were very disappointed that we didn't get anything for the second year in a row. We are following up with the provincial government to try to gain some level of explanation.
Alrighty, so we'll look forward to that response from the government of Thomas. Thanks. I think it's just important that people recognize why work doesn't get done that it's anticipated, and it is truly due to funding.
And if I could add it, we could go ahead and do that funding ourselves, but obviously we want to wait because, again, the funding formula is 90% that they'll pay. And this is the connecting link, which the government feels they still have a responsibility to maintain. And it's very unfortunate. We had the same situation in Wallaceburg a few years back where we waited for the funding. It eventually came through and it was significant financial benefit. But in the meantime, we had a number of complaints from residents about the quality of the road. So we're in the same situation on this particular road now too.
Thank you, Thomas.
Councillor Latimer, item 2C now.
This is in regard to the letter we received on behalf of almost 80,000 residents, their families and staff in Ontario's long-term care homes. They were urgently requesting that the provincial government take immediate action to support the psychosocial and emotional well-being of residents. And they were writing a letter to ask for immediate attention and allocated resources to be applied to long-term care homes to support the psychosocial and emotional well-being of residents. And I felt it was important when I read this last week that we endorse this letter. And when I brought that to our Dr. Riedike's attention, she asked that we, when we write our letter in support of this, that we put a little bit of a Chatham-Kent twist on it. So Dr. Riedike, would you like to elaborate on this?
Through you, Mayor Caniff. Thank you, Councillor Latimer. I think for this letter, certainly we are fortunate here in Chatham-Kent to have been able to quickly mobilize some redeployed staff to ensure that our residents are receiving the appropriate nursing and hands-on care, but that some of their emotional needs are being met through some great work being done by either our early on staff, by some of our recreation staff, by some of our arts and culture staff. And so certainly those attachments are happening. Residents are very aware that people care. And so I thought in response to this, our slant on it would be that it really, really is important to make sure that those emotional needs are being met while residents have no access to their family members face-to-face and have no access to volunteers that they have come to know and love, so that we can support all of these organizations on really speaking to the importance of making sure that those emotional connections are still there.
Thank you, Dr. Riedike. With Council's permission, I would really like to follow through support of this letter's intent with that CK slant with the help of Dr. Riedike. Do we need to just, I don't know what we need to do to get that done.
So Councillor Latimer, you would like a letter sent. Is there a seconder to that? Councillor Kirkwood-White? Would you second that? Councillor Kirkwood, I can't hear you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple of comments and I'd be happy to second that.
Okay, if you want a couple comments now, go ahead, and we'll put it to vote.
I just wanted to make council aware, as with the May 16th miracle, that Chatham-Kent is leading the way. I've been working for the last several weeks with a group of community partners, including staff from Riverview Gardens, United Way, Public Health, the VON, Big Brothers Big Sisters, the separate school board, and the Age Friendly Committee to put together a program called Adopt a Grandparent that will involve residents at Riverview Gardens as well as other long-term care and nursing homes, matched with students who are home for the summer. And these connections are going to result in virtual visits and reading and entertainment and other things. And it has taken off really quickly, and I'm just so very excited about the possibility of making these connections and nurturing these relationships that are so important.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Latimer, did you have something to add to that before we put it to vote?
I just wanted, we could include that, Dr. Riedike and I, in this letter, but I also want to make sure that this letter would be sent out to other municipalities asking for endorsement.
Yes, so what we'll do is
Okay.
on that, you can work with Ms. Reed Dyke to put together that, and we'll add that in there. Anyone opposed to doing this letter? Hearing none, we'll get that letter done. The next one, 3A.
Perfect, thank you. This is with regard to the Midland tax relief. I just wondered if we would just send a letter of support. They've asked for a council endorsement.
Can I get a seconder for that? Councillor Oche, you second that?
I will.
Anyone opposed to sending a letter?
Hi, it's Gord Quinton. Can I make some comments?
You sure can.
So while I of course, I appreciate the sentiment of the town of Midland in writing this, I don't think it's a fair request. COVID-19 is not the fault of any particular level of government in Canada, and we all need to share in the getting the country back on track. And while it's true that only the federal and provincial governments can run deficits, so I, in theory, supporting of course, the federal and provincial governments supporting everyone. I'm not sure if a rebate for example, waiving 100% of the property taxes for all residential properties assessed below 500,000 is a fair way to do that. As you know, there are not everyone has been affected by COVID-19 in a financial way. So this is a very, I would say, uneven, unfair way to compensate both residents and businesses. I'd rather see targeted relief, which the federal and provincial governments are rolling out to help those businesses and residents that have been directly affected, rather than 100% rebate to everyone. And the biggest reason is cost-wise. We can't afford to do everything. So it's I'd rather it be targeted to those who need it. And of course, I support the Federation of Canadian Municipalities ask to assist municipalities where we've been negatively affected with our loss in user fees and that thing. But I just think this is a overstep of it's fine if council wants to endorse this, but it's not getting any endorsement from other municipalities that across the province that I know of, other than a few local municipalities around Midland. Thanks.
Councillor Sakachi?
Just a point of clarification, Your Worship. Hearing Gord, Mr. Quinton's comments, is this something that we maybe should be voting on electronically, or is this still something that we're just going to oppose in your comments?
We can certainly go to an electronic vote on this. Given the magnitude of what we're asking for, when you say waive 100% of the 2020 property taxes of 500,000 or less would be 95% of the homes in Chatham-Kent.
Correct, Your Worship. So I just think that something on this caliber, I think, should be voted on electronically. I know that it's going to cause a little bit of work to get that up on the stream, but I would appreciate that.
We will work on putting that up there. As Councillor Latimer has some closing remarks, she's the last one that would like to speak.
Thank you. I just thought this merited just conversation amongst councillors, and I was interested in hearing what our CFO had to say about it. But I don't mind putting it forward and doing a vote. But truthfully, my aim was to have communication, just conversation about this around the horseshoe. And I think we started to do that.
So given that you want just discussion, do you still want to put it to a vote the letter or not?
No, I don't particularly need that letter sent forth on our behalf, particularly if our CFO is telling us that he doesn't recommend it, then I would defer to his wisdom.
Okay, thank you. And the last item that you had was 3D.
And again, this was something that I wanted to put out onto the table and hear some conversation around. This is with regard to a letter from Kitchener municipality to Prime Minister Trudeau with regard to the establishment of universal basic income support. And I wonder what council's thoughts were on just endorsing this conversation starter.
I don't see anybody looking at any questions or any room for comment so far. Councillor Solomon.
That's a discussion that could take days. And it's not at our level to this. That's a federal jurisdiction. I don't really know why we'd be discussing it, quite frankly. No one's universal is ill-defined, and there's all sorts of pros and cons on it. Whether it creates a whole group who never work again. So
Yes,
I don't know at this time of the evening. It's
Hi, Dylan.
without our jurisdiction whether it's is really something we need to discuss. There, that's my communication on it.
Councillor Adam, are you okay? I don't see any other people wanting to discuss it. Are you okay with that?
Sure, that's fine. Again, I was more of just having a sounding whether or not we wanted to endorse that letter, but that's fine. No worries.
Okay. The 4 items, Councillor Latimer, you'll put a motion to approve those. Can I get a seconder from Councillor Bondy? Okay. How about Councillor Wright?
Oh, sorry, Mayor Caniff. I had a little trouble with my button. Yes, of course, I'll second it. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Carried. Non-agenda business. Councillor, we got all sorts of it going on here. Councillor Oche, then I'll go to Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to send on my condolences to Councillor McGrail on the loss of her father. I'm sure the rest of the council would like to send him on as well. So, that's what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I would like to bring forward an issue. I have some questions and would like to clarify one of the service reductions that was brought forward in the report to council on May 11th that was voted on and approved. And it is specifically regarding the service levels that is around horticulture, planting, and maintenance. And I think there may be a bit of clarity needed from my perspective when this was introduced, just because of the wording around horticulture, planning, and maintenance. I know some of our communities in Chatham-Kent require the work of students to plant flowers and to water flowers in the community. And other communities in Chatham-Kent rely on the not-for-profit and the community sector who would purchase flowers or flower baskets, leverage CK's public works unit or potentially a contractor to hang those baskets, and then those community groups would water them throughout the course of the summertime. And I feel like this needs to be brought forward because it was unknown to myself as a councillor and likely others around the table that when we had voted on the reduced service around horticulture, planning, and maintenance, some staff were certainly staff assumed that that also included then reducing service and no longer having the work of Chatham-Kent's Public Works to partner with organizations and provide that service of hanging baskets. And it was brought to my attention that at this point in time, all, or at least certainly many of the horticultural groups or BIAs or community groups would have ordered their flowers baskets to be hung. And so Tilbury in particular has already paid $3,000 for their baskets. And while that seems like a low number when you're working in the municipality and we're talking about our budgets and the $2 million that we're trying to find, for a community group, that is what they're fundraising for every year. And that really does, that is something that they have a goal to do, is to put up those flowers. And so when you multiply this across CK, you can see how this adds up to tens of thousands of dollars in our community not-for-profit sector that would have been spent on these flowers. And now the community groups themselves are scrambling to identify how it is they're going to get these baskets hung up. And in some cases, I fear they've taken upon themselves to do whatever it is that they need to do to get those baskets hung up. So I would like to bring forward a motion, and then I do have some questions, but I will lean on our clerk around the procedure for bringing forward this motion, as it does address the report that was provided on May 11th.
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan and Mayor Caniff. So my understanding is if you're bringing a motion to change a direction that council has already decided on May 11th, then that would require a 2/3 vote to put the motion on the floor. And if you can get the 2/3 vote to put the motion back on the floor, then the vote may occur.
So then what I would like to do, pending approval of council, is I would like to motion that Chatham-Kent maintain its service levels to the communities with regards to hanging and removing flower baskets for the 2020 season. And if I could get a second for that, we
I'll
can.
second that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Latimer, or sorry, Councillor Harrigan, can you confirm when you say all communities, referring to any community that has them happening previously, regardless of whether they're hung by summer students or just to confirm that?
Correct. So what I am asking is that Chatham-Kent, if a community has acquired flower baskets, that Chatham-Kent provides service to hang and remove those flower baskets for the 2020 season.
Okay, any, I see some hands up, but that's for the, any questions related to the motion here to reconsider? If I don't see any other hands coming up.
Mayor Caniff, sorry.
Oh, Councillor Scotchy, yes, would you like to speak to that?
I apologize. Yes, Your Worship. Just the clarification is that this is only going to be specifically for the hanging and removing. What's going to happen? Like, I know we're talking about the potential safety of people hanging and removing them. What are we talking regarding the actual servicing and the maintenance of those baskets when they're up? So I just need a little clarification on that.
So I'm again not sure of procedure. That was going to be something I was going to bring up with staff for discussion in terms of what that looks like through the mayor, just in response to Councillor Sakachi's question. But as I understand it, many of the communities actually have volunteers that have been watering their flowers. Some may have relied on students, for example, in Chatham or Wallaceburg, and that might be something that their community groups, horticultural societies, or BIAs may have to have a discussion about. But I think this is a good way for us to meet in the middle and make sure that the flowers that have been purchased don't go to waste.
Does that clarify your concern there, Councillor Scotchy?
It does. Just reading the motion on there now, it does say that the horticulture planning and maintenance. So I guess I will just support this and wait to hear the conversation. Thank you, Mayor Caniff.
Council, just so that you're aware, the motion that's on the screen right now is for you to reconsider the decision that you made on May 11th with regards to this. So right now we're just looking, would you like to discuss this and vote on it? We need a 2/3 vote to reconsider at this time. So we'll put that motion up now, and if a 2/3 is achieved, we'll continue the conversation. If it's not, then we'll move on. Still waiting for one more vote. Still waiting for one more. Please make sure you hit your submit. All votes are in. Motion to reconsider passes. So now we can go back to the question.
Can we get the motion that we're looking at on the screen, and then count over to you, Councillor Harrigan?
Great, thank you. So through the mayor, I just want to give, again, I think I've already iterated that this is something that's very important to the volunteers in our communities, and is also important to the members of the community in Chatham-Kent who are now staying home. I had a letter from Miss Linda Henderson that was sent to me that outlined not only how this is something that's very important to the horticultural group that she belongs to, but also to businesses and to residents while we are in times of COVID and we are staying around our communities. This does offer a little bit of beauty in our downtown areas, and that's important. But I did have some questions through the mayor to Thomas or potentially Ryan Brown around the cost of this to demonstrate the comparatively low cost compared to the deficit that we're looking at. So Thomas, are you able to share with us and open the chart that Ryan had provided council earlier that outlined the, or describe it, that outlined the current state and the cost of doing this work?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the costs that we're talking about for the remainder of 2020 would be a total of $26,000. And of that amount, that's a combination of outsourced equipment rentals, contractors, and also internal labor, equipment and vehicles. The breakdown of that $26,000 would be $12,000 would be the outsource of equipment rentals and contractors, and the remainder would be the internal labor, our own equipment, and the use of our vehicles.
Okay, thank you. And through the mayor to our CFO, in terms of the estimation that you provided, can you talk about, what level of materiality or confidence here? As council, we saw this 2 million number, but there's a lot of zeros at the end of $1 million. And so in your opinion, is this something that you feel could be done and we would be able to maintain, a relatively similar financial position in relationship to the COVID-19 crisis?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. As Ryan Brown, Director of Public Works, had communicated to council, it's basically that staff will be pulled off of other jobs that they would do for the time that they need to hang the baskets and take them down in the fall. So there's other jobs that aren't going to be done. Like I say, the main part of what was passed earlier was not to hire summer students and not to incur avoidable expenses. And also to your what you addressed is that at this point in time, it's an estimate of a deficit between $2 and $5 million. We were trying to come up with ways to come up with $2 million of service level adjustments, and that was the purpose of that report back then. I also reminding council that a week ago Monday, you asked for an additional $2 million of service reductions within 2020 as part of the task force recommendations. So I just see that there's a lot of pressure on administration to come up with ideas for savings. This was one of them, but it's still a decision of council what levels are provided.
Thank you. And, just quickly to council, I think for myself personally, if the line item on May 11th report had identified a bit more detail. And I recognize as council, we don't want to go into the weeds, but a bit more detail that might have been more clear for both council and then staff in the conversations that we've all had over the past week. So I'm hopeful that my colleagues around the Horseshoe will support this, because it certainly does support the work that our community groups are doing. And we're all going to be spending a lot more time in our downtown areas this summer once some of those restrictions have been lifted. So I think that that community pride and beautification is something that puts a smile on people's faces, and hopefully is something that we as a council can do to support, so that we're not putting undue stress or strain on our not-for-profit sectors in our communities. Thank you.
Okay, I've got 3 hands up that I believe were for other items in other agenda items. Councillor Hall, Councillor Sakachi, and Councillor Latimer, are you for any questions related to this, or were you your hand up for other things?
Yeah, I had for other things, Mayor Cannabis, Councillor Hall. I may have some questions, but you can pass over to me right now. Thank you. Okay,
Councillor Sakachi, are you for something else?
Oh, for open agenda, Your Worship, I'm okay for this one. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Latimer, just confirm you're for something else as well.
Yeah, likewise, thanks.
Okay, so then I got Councillor Oche, followed by Councillor Thompson, then Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Now, if this was any other year, say like maybe next year, if COVID's not around, we would still be taking those public work employees off of other jobs to hang these. So I don't see a difference between this year, last year, or next year. As far as hanging the plants, I see it would probably be 7 places because we don't have the summer students in Chatham or Wallaceburg, and 3 of them have them up already. So that's going to bring that total down a bit. And I know Council Sakachi asked a question on who maintains them. All 7 of those areas water them, either volunteers, the BIA. So they're all taken care of by outside sources. So it's no additional funds coming from Chatham-Kent. So I agree with Councillor, sorry, can't even think here, Harrigan, that this was not one of the things that I thought would be affected from what we brought forward last week. I honestly thought the flowers were still being put up, just not anything planted by students. So I'm hoping as well that you'll agree with Councillor Harrigan's motion. Thank you.
Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yeah, I support this. As I read it, hanging and removing their flower baskets for the 2020 season, I can't see that that's going to be a really big imposition on staff. You know, it's a great thing to do considering we're not doing much of anything, let alone cutting grass in some places. Hanging flower baskets, I don't really believe we're going to be deploying troops to take care of this. It seems minuscule to me, but yet I think it'll have a pretty positive effect on what kind of looks like could be a pretty grim summer. And, you know, again, I just don't see that it's a big deal. Like, I think we can support this. And if we have to redeploy staff from some other job, really, how much time can this possibly take? And it's a good thing. It shows the communities that, you know, we're not giving up totally on our summer. We're not asking for a lot here, or Councillor Harrigan's not asking for a lot here. I think it's a great motion, and I really just don't think it's a big deal. And I think that we can handle it without having a problem that we're, you know, taking away from other jobs. And sure, there's going to be some sort of time reallocation of staff, but really, how much? Like hanging and removing. It's spring, fall. It's not maintenance throughout the summertime. So I'm in full support of it. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
My comments have been made. In interest of brevity, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, given I see no other hands for this, let's put this to vote.
One more vote. All votes are in. Motion passes.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Sakachi, then Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just had a quick question for Mr. Kelly. A lot of questions were raised, Mr. Kelly, in regards to the grass cutting in the past couple of weeks, and I completely understand the fact that we did support the service level adjustment. Just curious to see what you've done from an administration standpoint to work with the contractors to ensure that we at least have, you know, respectable amount of growth in our parks and our recreational area. We know that they can't really be utilized as they normally have been, but you know, still people are going out and taking walks with the family. So I just wanted to see if that has been addressed internally.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we sent out a summary earlier today, and in total, just for everybody's information, we have a total of 185 parks within Chatham-Kent, or 165 acres. And we provided an executive summary where we stand. And of those, there were really 5 problem areas that we've identified where we do have some contractual issues there. The primary issue has been that the rate of growth of grass and rain and heat has been perfect. And as a result, that we don't have enough capacity in our contract base to cut the grass twice a week, which is really required to maintain that 5 inch level. So we have spoken with the contractors, including the problem areas. We have provided to council the dates that they'll be cut, and I believe all of those will be resolved by June 2nd. By tomorrow, the cuts will be by June 2nd. We sincerely hope that as summer progresses, or spring and into summer progresses, that things will go back to normal. We have this problem really at this time every year, where we just don't have enough capacity to do what is required. So overall, what council voted for was essentially, over the term of the season, is a reduction in about half the number of cuts in total. So again, we're doing what we can to keep up to that 5 inch maximum. And we've taken action on all of the problem areas as well.
Well, thank you for your comments, Mr. Kelly. I appreciate that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Hall, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Thank you very much, Mayor Caniff. I actually have 2 items. One is just a question to staff. Could someone from administration provide an update on the status of the community safety zone along Thomas Avenue in Wallaceburg, as right near Christ the King Catholic School? I've received a couple of inquiries from people in that neighborhood in the community. If I can get an update on what the status is on that, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you, Mayor. It's Thomas Kelly, General Manager of Infrastructure and Engineering Services. So to date, we have completed 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. A total of 28 zones have been completed. We're now working on phase 3. That's an additional 17 new zones that we need to work on. We have had some concerns with the actual zone itself and the bylaws that exist in about 4 areas, and Thomas Ave is one of those areas. It's our intention to make the proper modifications. We'll be coming back to council with an amended bylaw, and then that'll allow us to complete the work. So we fully expect the work to be completed in the fall. That's the entire phase 3, the additional 17 zones.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. So Thomas Avenue, we can expect to have that completed in the fall. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And my second item, Mayor Caniff, through you, it's kind of a housekeeping issue, I guess, stemming from discussions from our last meeting regarding the Economic Recovery Task Force. I had some discussions with staff who have had ongoing discussions with the task force chairs. And looking at one of the elements of the motion that I brought forward and council approved, specifically having staff organize a strategic planning session with the task force and council. I understand that the end of June timeline that was approved was going to be very difficult to effectively follow through with for a number of different reasons. So therefore, I'd like to make a motion, and I understand what we'll have to, after talking with Judy, that we'll have to make a motion to reconsider as well, similar to what we just did a few minutes ago. But I would like to move that, or amend my motion from last meeting, that staff organize and plan and schedule a strategic planning session with council and the task force / business advisory group. This session will take place before the end of September of this year. The results will be reported back to council.
Okay, any questions related to this? Seeing none, we'll put this to vote as far as reconsidering the date from end of June to end of September. Oh, yes, we need a seconder. Can I get Councillor Finn?
Happy to second.
All right, we'll put it to vote.
Just as a reminder, council will need a 2/3 on this one also. All votes are in. Motion passes.
Okay, we'll put the motion up to change from June to September. Is there any questions related to that? Seeing none, I think it's a pretty straightforward motion, so we'll proceed on. Put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes.
Okay, the last person with a hand up is Councillor Latimer. Any comments?
Thank you. I would like to bring a request to council this evening, and it's around sending a letter to the Premier and Ministry in support of immediately increasing the funding envelope for long-term care, but more importantly, that the Ministry of Home Care and Long-Term Care develop and implement a provincial long-term care human resources strategy to accompany any funding increase. I have to thank Dr. Redyke and Kathy Hoffman for their input in this content of this letter. It's important, and they reinforce this with me, that the province does not just add more work onto long-term care home staff without additional funding being allocated to the sector.
Yeah.
Without people choosing long-term care as a career, no amount of funding will assist. And long-term care is really hard work. And while the rewards of good caregiving are reflected in the eyes of our residents, it is really hard work for staff in long-term care facilities across this country to provide this type of physical care day in and day out, or province I meant. As a council, we should also reinforce the importance that the recently announced commission into long-term care homes be nonpartisan and independent of owners and operators. This is to enable impartial review of the current long-term care best practices in both public and privately owned sectors. As a council, we should ask for the Premier's assurance that the Commission is tasked with recommending best practice standards of care with attached and associated funding levels that include effective accountability protocols regarding documentation, peer reviews, and resident family reviews. And I would also request that this letter be circulated to all municipalities for their endorsement. I think it's really important that we recognize or we put our support behind the current Long-Term Care Commission inquiry, and the fact that we need to recognize and be proud of all of our current long-term care providers, owners, and people who work in our municipality in the long-term care sector. These people are our warriors, and they are the reason, along with Dr. Colby's guidance and our public health instruction, that we have been fortunate enough to date to not have any infection rate to report. And my hat's off and appreciation go to every one of those owner and operators of long-term care establishments, along with retirement homes and assisted living facilities in Chatham-Kent. So I would like council's support for Dr. Redyke and Kathy Hoffman and myself to polish this letter up and send it off to the Premier's office and the Minister of Home Care and Long-Term Care.
Could I get a seconder for that? Councillor B. McGregor?
Happy to second.
Anyone opposed to sending this letter? Hearing none, it's moved. We'll move into first and second reading. Councillor Solomon and Councillor Wright.
We can't hear either of you.
I think Councillor Solomon's lost battery power.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Bondi then, seconded by Councillor Wright.
You're seconding.
Okay, Councillor Wright, you seconded, okay.
I'll second it.
Third and final reading, Councillor Foss and Councillor Finn.
So move.
Seconded.
Anyone opposed? Carried. Resolution of council in closed session and adjournment. Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you. And through the mayor, I would move that Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Monday, June 15th, 2020, and that Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act.
Councillor Pincinel, you second that?
Yes, I will.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none. Meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everyone.